Let's start again, and welcome to the second part of this morning session. And I'm very happy to present the talk of Professor Christian Kleenen. Professor Kleenen is a professor of philosophy at Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam. I hope my pronunciation is correct. And so he works on a very broad range of themes, primarily modern and contemporary philosophy, especially German idealism, neo-Kantianism, and transcendental philosophy, and the systematic issues that connect Kant, Hegel, and later traditions. He has published a lot on a whole lot of conceptual themes within neo-Kantianism, also on Rickert and the concept as a function, so neo-Kantian theories and the concept of mediation and determination. So his talk today will concern Southwest neo-Kantianism, and the title is Actualizing Freedom on Schiller's Relevance for Southwest neo-Kantianism. So without further ado, I give the floor to you, Professor.
Yeah, thank you very much for the kind introduction and for the kind invitation to Napoli. Can you hear me? Yeah. The view that neo-Kantianism is essentially a philosophy of culture has become fairly established in contemporary neo-Kantianism research. It was from Kant that the neo-Kantians learned to distinguish cultural realms as specific realms of reason with unbreakable laws of validity. Post-Kantian idealism was driven by it in its attempt to overcome the dualisms that characterize Kant's conception through a higher level unity of reason. Neo-Kantianism offers a synthesis between Kant and Hegel, and thus an appropriation of and distancing from both at the same time. This is accompanied by highly complex problems that in many respects have lost none of their topicality for philosophy to this day. In his analysis of Schiller's transcendental idealism, Windelband touches upon one of these problems. It concerns an issue that has shown to be of the utmost importance for the development of German idealism from its early phase to neo-Kantianism and beyond, namely the problem of actualizing freedom. In line with his Kant interpretation, Windelband stresses that Kant's decisive need is the transformation of the world into objects of consciousness, a transformation he refers to as freedom and as the central concept of both Kant and Schiller. This transformation contains, among others, the idea that the matter of natural appearances and the form of reason eventually point to each other and are purposefully coordinated. Schiller, though, as Windelband explains, focuses on the place of art in human life and conceives of it as the unity of theoretical and practical reason. Art is freedom as appearance. As such, art is self-determination of humans. The idea of self-determination constitutes the higher principle to which all realms of reason are subjected. Despite the validity, autonomy of these realms, in particular of morality and art, Schiller famously holds that art trumps duty in a beautiful soul. Moreover, he elaborates on the educational significance of the aesthetic refinement of sensations for the objective realization of Kantian moral law, turning the objective realization or actualization of the moral law into a value in its own right, alongside the value of morality. With his elaboration, Schiller, as Windelband rightly holds, prepares a conception as we can find it in Hegel's distinction between subjective morality and objective Sittlichkeit. I think very bad English translation, ethical life. Facticity of freedom would be much, much more precise and to the point. So I stick to Sittlichkeit. My thesis is that this indication of Windelband concerns a core interest of Bruno Bauch's philosophy of values, particularly his ethics, a core interest that he develops innovatively by integrating Schiller's view, criticizing Kant, and finally establishing the concept of the imperative of culture as the concept of realizing validity. that is, actualizing freedom. This conception is both consequent within the framework of transcendental idealism and problematic against the background of Hegel's speculative idealism. Seen systematically, it concerns the much discussed issue of Kant's formalism. With his critical remarks on Kant's moral philosophy, Schiller provided the post-Kantian idealist to neo-Kantianism with an important, and we have seen yesterday already, too, albeit in many respects inadequate, template. According to Schiller, fundamental concepts of Kant's philosophy presuppose a unity of their relatedness that Kant is unable to elucidate. The problem of the much discussed harmony between duty and inclination, more generally speaking, between nature and freedom, reason and sensibility, is the crux of the matter. Schiller attempts to remedy this within the framework of Kantian conceptions. The concrete subject, and thus real actions, are a positive unity of both. Nature, therefore, not only restricts, but also enables freedom. In later idealism, particularly with Hegel, nature itself is comprehended as a determinant of reason, no longer assumed to be merely opposed to it. Schiller's relevance apparently goes deeper than becomes apparent in the direct debate between Schiller and Kant, as already indicated by Windelband. What turns into the fundamental problem here is the actualization of freedom in the sense of its becoming concrete and thus singularized. Schiller had accused Kant of underestimating the importance of inclination, and with this, the natural, non-rational determinacy of the subject, the sense of an agent. For Hegel, this aspect of the positive inclusion of that which is given outside the law of reason will ultimately prove to be a condition for the actualization of the law of reason. The philosophical doctrine of validity and that of action must be unified. I would say validity without action is empty, action without validity blind. This issue also paved the way for the further development of transcendental philosophy. The Ethics of Bauch, one of the sharpest and most profound neo-Kantians, takes up Schiller's problematization of Kant and his supposed formalism and attempts to come to grips with the problem of actualizing freedom, or actualizing reason, however we put it. He does so against Kant, but in a Kantian fashion, just as the existence of validity has become a problem for contemporary transcendental philosophy of culture. In all of them, the existence of freedom, and thus of culture as realization, actualization, presentation, or shaping in accordance with reason, itself has become a problem. Schiller brought it up. Hegel sublated it speculatively, and a thinker like Simmel casts it in a provocative formula with his conception of the individual law. It is not by accident that Bauch deals with Simmel's conception. Simmel takes up the problem of action as the realization of freedom in terms of Lebensphilosophie. He reproaches Kant's moral philosophy for not taking into account the individuality of life and consequently of being inapplicable. Moral duty should be understood as an individual duty that emerges from the life of the subject. Required is not an abstract universal law, but an individual universal law. Simmel does not abandon the recourse to the universal of the law, but attempts to develop an ethics on the basis of individual life as the origin of moral law. Kant's categorical imperative leaves then out decisive aspects of the action, not least the context of the actor's life within which the action takes place. Simmel places the actor himself in the foreground as the performer of an act that can be morally judged in the first place. However, Simmel underestimates the objectivity of the moral claim of the action, according, I think, to Kantian, Hegelian, or neo-Kantian standards, and even to his own standards of an holistic individualism, of deriving duties from the entirety of the life of the individual. To put it regarding neo-Kantianism, oriented towards the issue of validity, a law that is supposed to apply to life can never emerge from life. The subject's moral competence would namely be lost. Bauch, in contrast, has tried to think individuality and universality within the framework of Kant's categorical imperative of morality, not against it. It is always and everywhere applies to any self-determined activity. Still, Bauch too holds that Kant's categorical imperative is not sufficient to make a concrete duty determinable. Duty must be, we could say, schematized, so to speak, from categorical imperative to action. Bauch takes on this task, albeit with strong philosophical borrowings, not so much from Hegel as from Fichte. Thematically, he uses Schiller's critique of Kant as his starting point. Already in his dissertation on Kant's ethics, Bauch aims to avoid amoral individualism while establishing ethical individualism. He shows how Kant's formalism does not destroy the individuality of the person, but provides it with a moral framework. Nevertheless, Kant's categorical imperative is for Bauch not sufficient to do justice to the particularity of the moral individual. He reproaches Kant regarding the individuality of the subject. Despite all reservations, yesterday we gave some indications, despite all reservations, he finds this same insight formulated by Schiller, and notes tirelessly, one could say, that Schiller argued against Kant's, quote, one-sided moral assessment of man, and pleads for a complete assessment of the totality of character. Accordingly, Bauch modifies Kant's doctrine of the categorical and hypothetical imperative. In order to remedy Schiller's complaint philosophically, Bauch wants to add further points of assessment. Ultimately, these concern what Bauch calls the requirement of actualization, Wirkensforderung, that is the cultural imperative. Bauch gains the additional points of assessment by working out the content relatedness of Kantian formalism, both more strongly and differently than in Kant. Three basic forms of the ethical principle emerge, all of which are of a content-related nature, not merely formal. Stressing the content-logical nature of principles is fully in line with the neo-Kantian appropriation of Kant, mediated by German idealism. How does it deal with Schiller's concern? Now, four aspects are decisive for Bauch's modification of Kant in this respect. Firstly, in line with Schiller, Bauch rejects Kant's doctrine of the categorical imperative as too narrow, as a one-sided moral assessment of man. Bauch's ethics addresses the moral character in a way that Bauch relates it to the totality of character. Ethics, as practical philosophy, concerns action in its entirety. Ethics is, so to speak, not narrowed down mainly to the will, even if also for Bauch, the will remains the center. Secondly, Kant does not satisfactorily explain the relationship between the ethical task and the fulfillment of it in action. He conceives of it as merely an infinite eternal task, without it becoming clear how concrete temporal tasks arise from it, which in turn are fulfillments of that task. Yeah, Bauch aims to clarify this. Thirdly, Bauch's elucidation of the possibility of fulfillment initially leads to the insight that the task should generally not be merely understood in the fashion of an imperative, that is, a commandment. Rather, the task is the value in its subject relatedness. Not all values are commands. Bauch does not restrict the Pratein, the practical, merely to actions that can be commanded. he extends it to the ethical behavior in a broad sense. Fourthly, the objectivity of the value. After all, Bauch is a Southwest philosopher of values. The objectivity of the value as a task implies the demand for the fulfillment of the task. Bauch emphasizes that there is a difference between the universal validity of a value in the sense of the claim to universal recognition on the one hand, and the universal validity in the sense of the claim to universal representation, Darstellung, realization, by all subjects towards all subjects on the other. This representation of values becomes the issue for Bauch, while acknowledging that there is no absolute detachment of the universal principle from a concrete situation. In contrast to approaches that dissolve validity in the concreteness of life, Bauch both wants to give the individuality of life its due and to hold on to the good sense of the categorical imperative. Life itself is to be subjected to the requirement of validity. The personal design of life and the unconditionality, the unconditionally valid, universally binding values must be brought into a synthesis. Bauch conceives of it in such a way that the individual will concretizes the universal ought. The individual will is understood as the actualization of the universal will. Therein lies the meaning of Bauch's hypothetical imperative, the demand for fulfillment related to the individual subject. Although Bauch maintains the fundamental importance of Kant's distinction between the categorical and the hypothetical imperative, he wants to develop Kant's distinction further. While Kant excludes hypothetical imperatives from his moral consideration, technical, practical, and so on, Bauch integrates them as ethical principles, that is, as part of the doctrine of Sittlichkeit. Moreover, precisely because it is an imperative, Kant's categorical imperative is not universal enough, but concerns a specific sphere within ethical validity. For reasons of time, I will not go into this relationship between the ethical principle and the individual situation, but only remark the following. According to Bauch's theory of values, all ethical principles as values have objective meaning. This includes hypothetical imperatives. Bauch distinguishes between commandable and non-commandable demands. The latter refer to the essence of the person. They are called demands of essence, non-commandable essence. Commandable demands refer to the will and the activity of the person. They are demands of will and of actualization. These three demands constitute the basic forms of the ethical principle. The demand of actualization gives Kant's hypothetical imperative new meaning. For Bauch, it individualizes the law of validity, combining universal validity and individual particularity. Hypothetical validity does not mean mere conditional validity. In Bauch's ethics, the hypothetical aspect doesn't concern the content of the claim, but its representation by the subject. A concrete duty is a duty the concrete duty as a duty is supra-individual, but at the same time my particular duty. It is subjective and individual too. The duty is the content of the demand in its subject relatedness, whereas the representation brings the value content in reality through the action of the subject. The powers and abilities of the subject constitute the subjective moment. The fulfillment of the demand is dependent on them. In this way, the concrete subject is given a supra-individual significance for cultural life. In the realm of culture, and hence that of actualizing values, a person does what it can to the best of its ability. This is the meaning of Bauch's demand of actualization. Unsurprisingly, he denotes it as the cultural imperative. Kant's hypothetical imperatives transform into cultural imperatives. So cultural relativism is ruled out. The demand of actualization as an ethical law always relates to the value of autonomy. The hypothetical nature of imperatives does not lie in their merely conditional validity, but in their relationship to subjective dispositions of actualization. It is precisely this subjective dimension that obtains objective meaning through the objective validity of the demand of actualization. While the categorical imperative demands universality, the hypothetical imperative demands particularity of actualization, both in one and the same individual action. Bauch's Fichtian sounding ethical imperative reads then as follows, quote, act in such a way that the maxim of your will can at all times be regarded as the principle of a universal law, and that you nevertheless represent a universal supra-personal value in your actions in an individual and personal way. That's it. Okay, but does this individualization of the moral law survive? This question points out to Hegel's doctrine of Sittlichkeit as a speculative idealist conception of the existence of freedom. Bauch aims to overcome Kant's formalism by so Bauch is not saying that this is a crude formalism. He continuously emphasizes the content relatedness, but as we have seen, he gives this Kantian idea of formalism and much more, so to say, intensive content-related character. So in that sense, we could speak of Kant's formalism. Bauch aims to overcome Kant's formalism by integrating the moment of actualizing validity through actions into the transcendental theory of validity. With this, there is a Hegelian motive in Bauch's examination of Kant's practical philosophy. In Hegel's case, the debate with Kant boils down to overcoming the standpoint of morality through that of Sittlichkeit, that is, the constellation of spirit in which freedom actually comes into being and actions are truly free actions. Like Hegel, Bauch criticizes Kant's architectonics of reason. Unlike Hegel, he maintains Kant's division of reason into theoretical and practical, but at the same time offers a conception of the unity of both, which, like Hegel, endeavors to identify the one reason as the ground of everything in a validity reflective fashion. Bauch sets out this idea in his theoretical philosophy in particular. In his Ethic, he returns to it. He tackles a problem that Hegel tackled in his logical doctrine of the idea. For Hegel, the absolute idea sublates in itself the theoretical and the practical idea and thus overcomes their opposition. In Bauch's ethics, this figuration takes the form that the ethical value requires its fulfillment in reality, but in order for the value to be a task towards reality at all, reality must be able to be represented or dargesteld by values. This necessary unity of value and reality is guaranteed by the transcendental conditionality of reality, the conditionality that culminates in Bauch's concept of the idea, that is, that objective relation of validity, which is the whole of conditions of objects, constitutes reality as well as its cognition. Bauch and Hegel agree on the relational character of the idea and its fundamental status. They also agree, unlike Kant, that the idea in the realm of cognition does not merely have a regulative function, but a constitutive one too. Although Southwest neo-Kantianism can generally be understood as a philosophy of values, Bauch brings the concept of the idea so close to the concept of value that it becomes the basic concept of philosophy, as the value character of the idea is only one of its dimensions. The concept of the idea, like in Hegel, is even the superordinate one. Meaning of truth comes to the fore that exceeds the prevailing determination of truth in neo-Kantianism as a specific type of validity, a theoretical validity. That is a qualification of the realm of cognition. The encompassing meaning of truth concerns truth as rationality or ideality as such. Truth as the foundation of any realm of values. The value of truth is the relation of unity between the various value realms. the idea of as unity, as the unity of the multiplicity of values, the logical as logos. As the whole of validity, truth is all-encompassing. It constitutes reality and thereby makes value actualization as such possible. Initially, of course, it's clear, this concerns the performance of cognition. Along with the constitutive function of truth goes the regulative one, and namely truth in its validity regulates the subject of cognition, so the cognizing agent. In this regulative respect, the value is a task, even an infinite task, but that's only one of its dimensions. Apparently, Bauch brings to light a close connection between truth, value, and reality. It results from the interrelation of constitution and regulation. One could see this as an innovative development of the fundamental axiotic relationship common in Southwest German neo-Kantianism. In this relationship, value actualization and self-formation of the subject are complementary. Subjects realize values and in doing so create goods, not culture, whereby values underlie all reality, and all reality is ultimately, as Bauch emphasizes it, constituted by truth. Values, whose validity is independent, whether they are recognized by subjects, give meaning and directions to the endeavors of subjects. Being a value and the task are both determinacies of the idea, Bauch's conception of the idea. The idea is, as a value, presupposition, and as a task, goal at the same time. Of course, cognition is not the only task. Different tasks can be identified, constituted by different values. So at the end, reality is the path and passage from the logos ground to the logos goal to truth. Bauch applies this fundamental conception developed in his theoretical philosophy to his ethics. Accordingly, he reproaches Kant for insufficiently having captured the relationship between task and fulfillment. This also concerns Kant's conception of the task as eternal, merely regulative, never brought to representation. This is also the decisive factor in Hegel's deliberation on the logical idea of the good. Actualization of values in the actualization of values, Wertverwirklichung, as entering values into reality, presupposes that reason and values, presupposes that reason and sensibility, values and reality, do not stand opposite each other without relation, but that the sensible realm has its transcendental condition in an objective, functionally lawful order of reason. This is, as Bauch rightly notes, a fundamental presupposition of any ethics, finds its justification in theoretical philosophy. Here, Bauch conceives of the idea as constitutive for all reality, as the very essence of reality, in which it appears. Thus, no chorismos, no strict separation of two worlds. Reality represents the idea. Reality represents the idea as the essence of reality. Reality is the appearance of the idea. In almost Hegelian terms, right? Bauch even writes that the representation of the idea is the otherness of the idea. The idea and its other make up the whole of the idea. I mean, this could just be quoted from Hegel. No, Bauch. Part of this value character of reality is that the value as the dimension of the idea related to the subject or task itself demands that instance of realization of value, which is the subject as a real person. Moreover, via the demands of will and actualization, the entire objective realm of values, and that's so to say the addition to Kant, so the entire objective realm of values, we could say all these fundamental values we know from neo-Kantianism, science, and so on. This entire objective realm of values is brought into the self-determination of the subject. Hence, not only Kant's perennial ought of the intention is overcome, but also any formalism of the categorical imperative. This is a considerable approximation to Hegel's speculative idealism. Yet it is only one side of the coin. The other is that Bauch's approximation is constantly contaminated by oscillating between the Kantian form of practical philosophy as a doctrine of duty and the Hegelian tendency to conceive of the normative conditions of the existence of freedom as something brought about by action. Bauch demands of essence, so basically the value relatedness of the agent, the subject, the demand of essence, posits the subject in its function of self-determination. In this respect, coincides with Hegel's free spirit. While Hegel subsequently elaborates on the objective spiritual conditions under which the existence of freedom can come about, basically trying to answer the question about these institutions related to the agent in a different way than in neo-Kantianism. Subsequently elaborates on these objective spiritual conditions under which the existence of freedom can come about. Bauch immediately turns to the demand of will and thus to the moral determinacy of human actions. Although he provides this moral determinacy of the will that determines itself with content, that is to say, with the realm of objective values, this connection of autonomy with the realm of values still does not make comprehensible what qualifies as concrete actions in terms of its validity. Just as for Hegel, the standpoint of morality does not make the existence of freedom comprehensible sufficiently. Bauch introduces the demand of actualization, the cultural imperative. It should make comprehensible how concrete duties arise for the subject, just as Hegel's Sittlichkeit is a unity of the universality of the determination of rules and the particularity of the self-determination of agents, make the concrete action qua singularization of freedom comprehensible. In contrast to Hegel's conception of Sittlichkeit, which takes the normative content of Sittlichkeit, in which the situated subject actualizes its purposes constitutively into account in its demand of actualization, Bauch does not initially focus on the social conditions, the institutional conditions of individual freedom. Rather, he conceives of the conditions of concretizing determination, of concretizing the law as a determination of the agent, of the subject, right? So the subjective dispositions, capacities, and powers, they limit, not the normative content. The normative context of these subjective conditions only comes into the picture later. From a Hegelian perspective, determinations of subjective spirit in which the subject is constituted are confused here with determinations of objective spirit in which the subject gives itself existence, is thematic. In this respect, the demand of actualization apparently remains underdetermined. Regarding those social conditions, for Bauch, the individual and the social dimension are, after all, mutually dependent. In Bauch's deliberation on social associations, because this you find everywhere in neo-Kantianism, the social associations. However, two things are noticeable that fit very well with the oscillation between a Kantian program and the actualization of this program through Hegelian tendencies of unity. First, that Bauch strips off Kant's duty-oriented profile. And second, this is really almost depressing if you read this ethics. Second, the lack of necessity in Bauch's determination of the social associations. Just fly in. Although the social associations concern different functions of self-formation, the subject, and fundamental structures of social life, they are not deduced by Bauch. The systemic context remains rather implicit and consequently basic features of their determinism. Finally, regarding the problem of, I could also say he just puts to paper his worldview, right, in the 30s, which is a problem in itself, but okay. So finally, regarding the problem of actualizing validity, it should also be noted or noticed that Bauch's ethics is unable to adequately appreciate the conditions of realizing validity in their intrinsic value. He sticks, you all know that, to this famous opposition of intrinsic values on the one hand and conditional values on the other, as Bauch then says, not only Bauch, many in that time, of culture versus civilization. Culture, the highest value of civilization, bad only means. Values of civilization are here only means to the end of representing values in the life of spirit. Contemporary transcendental philosophy has rightly overcome this opposition by presenting civilization, or as they call it, a utility, is the idea of the economic social, turning actualizing validity into an intrinsic value in itself. Hegel's doctrine of objective spirit is the existence of freedom qua manifestation of the absolute idea, structured in the fashion of self-knowledge, however, differs from this transcendental conception of validity and this actualization altogether. So, to conclude, we can safely say that Schiller's issues with Kant had great impact on the development of German idealism. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Keenan. Now the floor is open to discussion. I see a question from Rudolf.
Thank you very much for the interesting talk. So I wanted to ask you in which stand our two papers are confident. I want to ask you in which stand our two papers are confident with each other. I think they are not in conflict. So I highlighted the relationship between Kant and Schiller, and I referred to Bauer. It was one of the things who really solved this rupture between Kant and Schiller. And you have highlighted the relationship between Schiller and Bauer. And we can say that they spoke because unity and a rupture, and the rupture is between Kant and Schiller, and the unity is between Schiller and Bauer. So there are both things possible.
In a way, this was my point, but what you did, you presented Bauch only, so to say, in his negative aspect. Whereas what I emphasize is the immense importance of Schiller's Kant criticism, although Bauch has, as you showed, many issues of detail, but exactly this, that the categorical imperative is to narrow one-sided assessment. This is of the essence for Bauch's development. So there is an extremely positive element in Schiller, more regarding its tendency and its intention than let's say, on the level of his philosophical justification. And exactly this issue points out that this problem of actualization freedom, that then leads Bauch to a transformation of Kant, with Kant against Kant, so also not, so to say, only presented Kant orthodoxy, transformation, while at the same time integrating Hegel's whole idea and problem he has with morality and the problem of understanding the actuality of freedom from that perspective. So therefore, I would say that indeed our papers are not in conflict, but what you are saying is part of the whole story, where I try to sketch the whole story. And therefore, I think they complement each other really well, provided that you would make a kind of, so to say, transition, making the link, right? Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So what you say?
A bit louder.
What you say to Bauch's conversation?
Yeah, okay.
The Schiller in the 79.
Yeah.
Okay. And have to say to Bauch the same things there to Schiller, and then on my side.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, but then you underestimate, so to say, this distinction Bauch makes, I think, good, right, between task and the fulfillment of the task. You see, so it's not enough that something is a task, you also have to determine the structure of its fulfillment. And then, so to say, we can't just doesn't offer the structure needed for this. So, and therefore you get this whole idea that we have to we need to integrate the context. You could say at most, I think, with Kant that that you could say, yeah, but we have here the categorical imperative and we apply it to the maxims, and we have the maxims already, right? So this having the maxims already, that would be, so to say, the Kantian equivalent for this whole structure of Bauch in his cultural imperative. And then, yeah, I would say that This Bauch idea is much more, so to say, rich. Therefore, it is not a rejection of Kant, but it is an attempt to develop Kant's theory further by making more determined the structure of actualizing the categorical imperative in a concrete situation, while at the same time accepting its overarching meaning. So therefore, he has these three elements. So this first, demand of essence. So therefore, I would also say it's not, yeah, maybe if I think about this now, this is so non-commandable with, to speak with Bauche, because it's in demand of essence. So cannot demand the essence. The essence is the presupposition for being capable of actualizing it all. But maybe we could say, we could stretch it a bit, and we could say maybe this covers section 1 to 7.5 in Kant of the Critique of Practical Reason, where the focus is really on the distinction between nature and freedom. So, and then freedom comes in, and there you have, so to say, this wesensforderung, demand of essence. So it's only qualification of the law relatedness, of normativity relatedness, value relatedness of the agent, in contrast to being a mere natural event. And then what Kant does, he immediately comes up with duty. So this is criticized also by other neo-Kantians, and then there is, so to say, this idea in between, this categorical imperative, which, so to say, makes self-determination as the principle of essence. And then, yeah, but what's that? Then the whole theory of values comes in. Then we have these basic values. They are determinants of what it means to be nature, or what it means to be human. And then we get our value of truth, value of morality, justice, and aesthetics, and so on and so on. So this is, so to say, the primary content integrated. And now, so to say, this has to be actualized. Now you actualize it in a concrete situation. Why is it concrete? Because you're, so to say, concrete in a certain aspect. Now, and now comes, so to say, this subjective disposition that gives rise to the fact that I now give a representation and you pose the question, not the other way around. So I have a concrete duty, it's even a Bauch example, if I remember correctly, to give this presentation. And this you can make, so to say, comprehensible from the structure of Bauch. You cannot make it comprehensible from the structure of Kant. You can also say, only say, well, I can make this explicit in terms of categorical imperative being actualized. And then I have to get a kind of maxim in and so on, and always have to about duties and whatever, right? So therefore, cultural imperatives. So not against Kant, but trying with Kant to make determinable what it means to really actualize value as a concrete duty. This is what he would say. Therefore, it would not be against, his argument would, it's not against Kant. Kant is not, so to say, determined enough in this corner. I think it's right, but okay, we can.
No, it's interesting. It's
Rudolf.
and it's clear that Bauch and Schiller have tried to supplement something project. Then you know, structure of the community, and of course, Bauch has his own vision, his own philosophy, but is it become not your philosophy?
No, it's not. No, I don't think so, and Bauch himself doesn't think so. You know, this is why, so to say, discusses so much Lebensphilosophie and Nietzsche and that all, you know, always to show now Kant has the better position. You cannot get rid of the categorical imperative, but they are right, bringing concrete life into the debate. And now we have to make a more intrinsic relationship between the categorical imperative, also not in terms of an individual law in the sense of so the categorical imperative and the concrete situation of life of the individual. So, and then you get in these three structures, or this threefold structure at the end, having this cultural imperative, which is, so to say, the law for you. Like I had this more or less this Fichte paraphrase of Bauch.
Okay, no, sorry, maybe later. Okay. We have another, no. It was fascinating. But we have another question from Giovanni Muruno.
I have a new question, but if I have read the German,
yeah, sure.
Alors, ja, de Londres appendo de proces de verklichung und das zu sein, die westlichen Neo-Kantianismus in Hegel wieder entdeckt haben. in Anschluss von dieser Bilderwahl auch von der Industrie. Jetzt meine Frage bezieht sich mehr auf die Bilderwahl oder die Bilderwahl-Rezeption von Schiller. Eine Konstant von dieser Rezeption in die verschiedenen Aufsätze ist immer dieser Ausdruck von Bilderwahl auf Schillers starke Unterschied zwischen Ideal und Bild. Das findet ja in jedem Punkt. Also Bilderwahl sagt, das ist ein wichtiger Punkt von der Bilderwahl von Schiller, die das ist. Sein Anschluss zu Kant und sein Anschluss zu neo-Kantian. Ideal und Leben, wer wird vielleicht leiden, immer außerhalb. Wie kann diese Stellungnahme mit ihrer
die Frage ist einfach, oh, excuse me, so question is what does it mean auseinander? In what sense? So Windelband praises Kant for introducing consciousness as the principle of synthesis. If that's the case, there is no strict, as Windelband says himself, dualism. So, but now we have to conceive of this relationship. Now and then, so to say, the enemy is Hegel, who identifies, so to say, at a certain level, this relationship, and not keeping the tension, according to the neo-Kantians. But therefore, I would say the issue would then be how to interpret exactly this auseinander, this separation. And also in Bauch, so there is no formalism. There is no strict separation. There is the idea as the principle of everything. But then you get in, so to say, this, and Bauch is a Windelband scholar, so to say, Windelband was his first master. Then you get the idea that the idea is on the one hand constitutive for reality, but on the other hand, regulative for the agent. So you get this two dimension of constitution and regulation in one validity structure. And this is in a way they try to solve, so to say, this problem and remain a distance. Yes, I don't think that on the one hand, this sounds very, very plausible. Because if you start with Kant and you make this strict distinction between constitution and regulation, then you see here a kind of integration, which is also Rickard's point, having this distinction. But on the other hand, then, I mean, if I now would put it with regard to Bauch, and this all goes beyond Windelband, of course, because Windelband is more or less, so to say, he gives the ideas to work with for the others. But you know, if you then apply this to Bauch himself, and Bauch develops a philosophy, excluding other philosophies, what does this mean? Is this now infinite too? Is there openness for others, or is he saying that his philosophy is better than another one? And if it's better than another one, there must be a certain closeness, as we have in Rickard. Yeah, but if there is a certain closeness, then only the distinction between regulation and constitution is not enough too. So, so apparently, it's not enough. But the issue would, to come back to your question, the issue would just be what does exactly mean auseinander? What does exactly mean auseinander? What does exactly mean opposition?
Okay, so I will thank you, Professor Kinen. Thank you. So now it's the turn of the last speaker of this morning, Professor Gerhard Hartung. Just a moment while I transfer the presentation on the computer. Good. Perfect. Okay. So here we go.
Okay.
Okay.
And I press here.
Yeah, yeah.
Where?
No, you can just press
Oh,
the,
this is
the
what
arrows. Yeah.
Haha.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just a short presentation. So I'm happy to present the talk by Professor Gerald Arton. He's a philosopher working at the University of Wuppertal, and he focuses on cultural philosophy, philosophical anthropology, the history of philosophy in the 19th and 20th century, and also the theory of philosophical historiography. So his research focuses on the interplay between system and history of philosophy, addressing how philosophical traditions shape their own past in some way. And today his talk will concern Wilhelm Windelband. The title is Wilhelm Windelband on Schiller's Transcendental Idealism as Kulturphilosophie. So without further ado, I leave the floor to you, Mr. Arton.
Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation and the introduction. I hope you can hear me. I try this with a microphone, but I have to read also the text. Yeah, Wilhelm Windelband is one of the leading university philosophers, Universitätsphilosophen in the German-speaking world around 1900. Also, he did not leave behind a systematic work in an eminent sense. He produced, in addition to his studies on the history of philosophy from antiquity to the present, a number of essays published under the title Präludien, Aufsätze und Reden zur Philosophie und ihrer Geschichte. That's a new edition. Done by one of my contributors a few years ago. First published in 1884 and then up until the 1920s in 9 editions and numerous translations, so on. So, no, this doesn't work. So here, this is, here you can see Windelband, the Präludien, and this is one edition that I make with Jörn Bohr, my contributor, Forschungsgrundlagen Wilhelm Windelband. And the next slide, you see the book published in Forschungsgrundlagen in 2020, but you don't have to buy the book. You can look on the digital version, online version there. If you need more information, I can give it to you after my presentation. 2 remarks on the preludes. By Windelband's time, philosophy has become an academic discipline, Fachwissenschaft. Teaching at universities and schools was based on textbooks and evaluated through examinations. Philosophical societies were being founded on professional journals, Fachjournale, established. All the essays on the Präludien stands in an institutional context and were first published as speeches for institutional occasions in universities and academies, or as contributions to professional journals before being collected in the Präludien. This is a huge difference between the time around 1800, the time of Kant, Schiller, and Hegel. Yeah. Second, the Präludien is a collection of essays, but it goes beyond the genre of collected essays. The title indicates that these are preludes to an emerging philosophical system, or to put it directly, since Windelband was unable to realize the plan of a philosophical system, they function as a placeholder for one. This becomes clear from a glance at the table of contents, where alongside studies on the history of philosophy, Socrates, Spinoza, Kant, Fichte, Hegelianism, there are also systematic works on epistemology, logic, psychology, moral and religious philosophy, and aesthetics too. And also on philosophy of culture. The treatise Schiller's Transcendental Idealism was only included in the 4th edition of the Preludes in 1911. Its first publication appeared in volume 10 of the Kant-Studien, 1905, dedicated to the memory of Schiller on the 100th year anniversary of his death and to his possible contemporary relevance. In this volume, prominent representatives of German-speaking philosophy around 1900 are present. Alongside the editor Hans Feinger, there are Otto Liebmann, Rudolf Eucken, Jonas Kohn, Bruno Bauch, and Willem Windelband, among others. In 1906, the treatise was published again in Schiller als Philosoph und seine Beziehung zu Kant. Schiller as a philosopher and his relations to Kant. Commemorative volume to the Kant-Studien, edited by Hans Feiger and Bruno Bauch. Here, the studies on Schiller's philosophy from the Kant-Studien were reissued once more in the same order and without alteration of the content. I would like to divide my lecture into two sections. First, I will analyze the context of Windelband's treatise. We read his treatise differently depending on whether we encounter it in a scientific journal, where many authors contributed, or in a collection of essays, the fragmented monograph of a single author. So, and what? No, this was too, okay, yeah. This is, okay. The text and context of Wilhelm Windelband's treatise on Schiller in the Kant-Studien is remarkable. Setting aside Otto Liebmann's self-experiment as a poet in Schiller's style, it's funny, and some notes on Schiller's archival materials, portraits, and busts, the interest of the authors of the Kant-Studien is by no means idolatrous or antiquarian. Rudolf Eucken, in his introductory remarks, under the title Was können wir heute aus Schiller gewinnen? What we gain from Schiller today, in fact poses the critical question whether a commemorative day is meaningful at all. The conditions, he argues are too different. Schiller's optimistic era, driven by the idea of a national future, is contrasted with a precarious and powerless present that has gained little from the achievement of national unity. The main problem of the present, in Eucken's view, is the disintegration of psychic and social life. Against this background, Eucken presents the philosopher Schiller, as a counter-figure to modernity. Schiller subordinated his entire created work to the idea of a life's work and Lebenswerk, and his view of fellow human beings to the idea of humanity. Schiller becomes so a figure of tireless labor, it's a very Protestant view, who above all shapes his own life into a work and who transfers the thought to humanity. Matter becomes form, life is justified as a work, Lebenswerk. Here, Eucken recognizes a profound moral impulse that guided Schiller in his struggle for spiritual existence and led to the building of a genuine culture of spirit. With great pathos, Eucken declares Schiller the therapist of the present. He teaches courage for life, joy in creation, confidence in one's own powers, and overall a great optimism. That's the Schiller of Eucken. Friedrich Alfred Schmidt, a student of Rickert and Windelband, sketches the development of Schiller as theoretischer Philosoph. He too is not concerned with details, but with the description of an outstanding personality, in which intellectuality and morality fall together into proper, energetically personal mastery. Schmidt's aim is to illuminate Schiller's personality in its various facets. He is a poet and philosopher, fundamentally a metaphysician. The influences of Kant and Fichte on Schiller are incidental, so Schmidt notes that Schiller was I quote, dilettantisch student of Kant. But that is not the point. What matters is that Schiller was able to absorb all the contradiction of his time, did not resign in the face of the insolubility of the theoretical and practical problems of life, and developed a personality that is his personality as a deed of freedom. Bruno Bauch reconstructs the idea of freedom in Schiller as a driving formative principle of the artist and genius. Freedom is for Schiller, as Bauch says, a Protestant principle. The philosophizing poet bridges the contradiction of reality, for example, between nature and spirit, and integrates them into a Weltanschauung. Bauch celebrates Schiller as an artistic educator. Seine Kunst weist dem Individuum den Weg zu sich selbst, zur autonomen Innerlichkeit, weist es darauf hin, dass der schönste Sieg, den es im Kampfe des Lebens erringen kann, die Selbstbestimmung, die Selbstbezwingung und Selbstbeherrschung ist und löst es aus dem Schicksalsweg des Lebens in der eigenen Brust auch des Schicksals Sterne suchen. His art, yeah, I don't bring the English translation, I think it's understandable. This pathos of an individual struggle for self-determination is joined by the national idea in Bauch. For Bauch, Schiller is less a dreamer of cosmopolitanism than a realist of national delimitation of individual life plans. These examples are sufficient to understand the context of Windelband's treatise. Although we hold the Kant study in our hands, this is not about Kant research. Instead, it is about the unity of Schiller's personality and work, an analysis and critique of modern culture, about questions of Weltanschauung, worldview, education towards a self-determined life, and national pathos. In this context, we read Windelband's text. Windelband asks about Schiller's influence on the further development of Kantian philosophy and the transformation of philosophical idealism. After the introductory qualification that Schiller did not want to design or develop a philosophical system and was free in his use of philosophical motives from other thinkers, for example, Jacobi and Schelling, Windelband places him among the representatives of transcendental idealism because he adheres to the fundamental conviction that there is no other reality than that produced by the activity of reason. In this sense, freedom is Schiller's central concept. The artistic disposition, the generation of the aesthetic world from the consciousness of the artist makes Schiller a follower of Kant's doctrine. What connects Schiller with Kant is above all the search for a unity point of freedom and necessity. Schiller sees this point in aesthetic life, Kant in moral judgment. Going beyond Kant, Schiller asserts, as Windelband underlines in his transcendental psychology and anthropological thesis. There we are. Das ästhetische Leben ist eine spezifisch menschliche Lebensform. Aesthetic life is a specifically human form of life. Beauty exists only in the human world. Schiller's central point, freedom as self-determination, is declared the culmination point of aesthetic and moral value determinations. The substantive differences between Kant and Schiller become clear in their philosophies of history. For Schiller pursues cultural history and situates aesthetic life in a historical movement whose goal is a realm of perfect cultivation. Yet one commonality remains decisive, which can be summed up in a historical, philosophical, geschichtsphilosophische These. Geschichte, das ist the second These, dieses Geschichte ist kein Naturgeschehen, sondern eine Tat der Freiheit. We now see what distinguishes Windelband's text. It is from the others in the Kant Studien. It is the objective argumentation that places Schiller close to Kant, the problem of freedom, and also at a distance, the problem of history. The absence of pathos, of heroism and national awakening, and a subtle critique of modern culture. The unity of personal life is an aesthetic project. In this sense, Schiller as poet and philosopher also becomes a guiding star for Windelband. Let us now continue and read the same text of Windelband. This is an experiment. In the context of the preludes, preludian for his own philosophy. There we are. Let's go. Windelband included the treatise Schiller's Transcendental Idealism in the first volume of the Preludian. The volume begins programmatically. This is the volume. You have to buy it after the conference. With a contribution, what is philosophy? What is philosophy? And then leads to the reader through the stations Socrates, Spinoza, Kant, and Goethe to Schiller. Subsequently, contributions on Hölderlin, Fichte, Hegelianism, and mysticism of the present follow. What on the surface seems disconnected acquires upon closer analysis a striking structure. For the essay produces an argumentative path, an Argumentationsweg. So let's follow the steps. Philosophy and history of philosophy are systematically interwoven. The history of philosophy is a history of the awakening of philosophical claims to validity. The result is the constitution of a Normalbewusstsein, normal consciousness, in which normativity and normality are equated. I think this is the systematic center of Windelband's philosophy, this interconnection between normativity and normality. The theoretical and practical consciousness of an era is objectively valid. Socrates is both an individual and an institution. He represents normal consciousness, namely the fact that the need for truth can be shown in the thinking of every individual person. Socrates' understanding of philosophy is a lived idealism, that is, philosophy of cultivation. Next point. Spinoza unites in a thought mathematical certainty and moral security. He lived for the truth. Thus, he is a philosophical model for all times. Then Kant devised a philosophy that overcomes cultural particularity. His thought stands for a modern Gesamtkultur. But this Gesamtkultur is shaped by the difference between science on the one hand and worldview, Weltanschauung on the other. Kant marked the limitation of scientific consciousness and thereby assigned to normal consciousness, a limited domain for a justification of highest value is scientifically impossible. After Kant, the demand for Weltanschauung must be treated philosophically. That is, science and life, nature and value, must be united in a worldview. Alongside scientific knowledge, historical knowledge must take its place, and critical philosophy must be complemented by a philosophy of values. Only in this way can philosophy claim to be a theory of the entire human world, life world, Lebenswelt. And what? Good. Goethe, of course, Goethe stands, as Socrates did before, for the representation of an individual life that possesses an intuition for the human life world. The formula is self-liberation through self-formation, appropriation of tradition through its sublation. Goethe represents as an individual a concrete and historical reality. He is Normalbewusstsein in one instance, integrating science and life. You can see how the preludian Windelband's path leads to Schiller. Schiller represents a concept of freedom, a philosophical disposition that dares to generate an aesthetic world from the consciousness of the artist. Thus, Schiller does not appear merely as a follower of Kant's doctrine or as a dilettantish reader, but as the one who thinks with Kant beyond Kant. For Windelband, there are two ways to think beyond Kant. One path concerns the theme of historical consciousness, which takes the contradiction of freedom and necessity into a dialectic under interplay of historical, social, and political events. On this path, Hegel is a guide we heard about. The other path aims to an anthropological determination. Modern man cannot theoretically resolve the contradiction of freedom and necessity and must free himself from moral demands. This succeeds only in aesthetic life, in the free interplay of forces. There we have the display of forces again. Aesthetic life is in this sense the specifically human form of life in modernity. The goal is to give form to life in contradictions: necessity and freedom, matter and spirit, nature and value, nature and history, subject and object, being and becoming, etc. This form, as Schiller already knew in his inaugural lecture in Jena, essentially consists in the productive appropriation of the historical dimension, Universalgeschichte, universal history. The representation of the history of languages, customs, sciences, morality, etc., of cultural history as a whole shows us aesthetic life in historical movement, always driven by the free interplay of forces and still driven today. For Windelband, this is called Bildungsphilosophie, philosophy of education and cultivation. So this is a double sense of Bildungsphilosophie in German language, education and self-cultivation. For Cassirer, this will be called Kulturphilosophie. For both Windelband and Cassirer, history is a deed of freedom. For the sake of completeness, following the treatise on Schiller come contributions on Hölderlin. Here the thesis is Hölderlin is a case of resigning consciousness, the pathology of normal consciousness. Yeah, Hölderlin is sort of a problem for medical treatment. And Fichte, Fichte is an incarnation of the historical human who constructs the German people as normal people. This is very central for the Fichte reception. German people as normal people, the incarnation of Normalbewusstsein. So the French are not normal. Yeah, and I don't know what's up with the Italians. So only the Germans are the normal people. Then on Hegel and Hegelianism, here's the thesis: the restitution of philosophy as science, in that from the historical cosmos of the super-historical principles of normal science are derived. And at the end of the volume, one of the Preludian, mysticism. Here's the thesis: mysticism is an expression of a timeless longing for a spiritual unity of life, and as an indication of the task of an objective idealism which combats the most dangerous option of modernity. And what is the most dangerous option of modernity for Windelband? Of course, epistemic and moral relativism. We see that the conception of the Preludian is indeed meant programmatically. Windelband begins with the question, what is philosophy, and gives us a series of answers whose basic idea is normality and normativity must be mediated in the consciousness of the modern cultural human being, and incidentally, also in the institutions of modern cultural life. Cultural history must be designed as the horizon of the developing consciousness of freedom of humanity. And cultural history has an educational mission, the stabilization of normal consciousness and the combating of pathologies of consciousness. So, I come to the end. By this, Windelband means an attitude of, Windelband means an attitude of resignation with regard to scientific knowledge and moral action, when the question of truth and the good life no longer arouse interest. Schiller, as a representative of the generation around 1800, could not yet know the extent of these pathologies, but as a personality, a poet, philosopher, educator, he showed a way in which a therapy for the diseases of modern culture could look. In summary, my last slide, We see two sides of Windelband's construction of Schiller's personality and work. Windelband is both a theorist of modern culture and its critique. He is a representative of political liberalism and a conservative in terms of values. He is an optimist with regard to scientific progress and a pessimist with regard to the dangers of moral and cultural regression. So the idea of unity in aesthetic life in modernity is above all a sign of resignation, I think. Windelband no longer shares the enthusiasm of the years around 1800. His transcendental idealism is powerless and thus a symptom of his time. The struggle for normal consciousness and its alleged pathologies seeks only to preserve the ways of life and institutions of the 19th century. The fifth edition of the Preludium goes to press in the autumn of 1914, in the first weeks of the Great War. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Artung. So now the floor is open for discussion. I already see a question from Sabato.
Thank you, Professor Artung, for your very complete tour. I want to ask you, in your opinion, we can infer that Windelband reads Schiller together with Fichte, in the sense that are both authors that it's about the mission, I would say, of Gabe, of the German people, in the context of the beginning of the 20th century. We have some others, for example, Meineke, that together these two authors. And if we consider that the concept of culture in Windelband is a mission of Gabe, of the mankind of humanity, in your opinion, is there in Windelband this similarity? This, as I'll say, analogy in the function in which he uses these two ethos. I don't know if this is clear, the question.
What are the two?
Fichte and Schiller.
Yeah, okay. Fichte and Schiller are obviously connected in Windelband's perspective, obviously. So therefore, Schiller is the role model for national awakening, as Fichte is around 19th century. And yeah, this is but we have to say, if we read this text of this time, so Windelband's reflection on Normalbewusstsein, on Germanness as the normal status of mankind, and the German people as the Normalvolk, and we combine it with, for example, Cohen's essay on Deutschtum and Judentum at the beginning of the First World War. We see this, there's a strong interrelation about between the national particularity and the universal task. And the bridge is that is not a contradiction, that the German national task is to fulfill the universal task for mankind. Yeah, and this is, there's only a discussion about the determination, what determines the German people. Are they German by birth, or are they German by being by connection in culture? Do the Jews play the same game with us, or so all these questions are on the table at this, and you can see that Bach with his exclusion then in the First World War of Jews from, he tried to exclude the Jews from the Kant-Gesellschaft. Then you have this. Here you have the foundation of all this, but it's not, you don't have with Windelband all the consequences. You don't have all the consequences in it, no? Not the radicalization of the concept. So what means Volk? Yeah, people. What means German Volk? Okay.
So now we have a question from Professor Weiser.
Yeah, I wonder how or whether Windelband had another conception of culture than his own. That is to say, there was a rough, well before him, 1780s, Hegel is developing his own conception of culture, which is much more loose and than anything Windelband was talking about. No conception of normal that was signed in Herder. All cultures are normal in their time and place, and Herder allows for a great deal of individuality between cultures, which neither Windelband or any of the neo-Kantians seem to have in mind. They've gone off the bridge, off the deep end, I think. And, and they think that there's one normal idea of culture and it should hold for everyone. But that just seems to me a terrible mistake. But do you see, so the question, do you see anywhere where Windelband and these guys understood there was another competing conception of culture? Or were they just totally ignorant of the Herderian tradition?
Yeah, totally ignorant.
Really?
Yeah, yeah. So if you follow up these steps of transformation, what means Geist, Gesamtgeist, objective mind in 19th century, you see this tendency. So you have and you have this difference, the parting of the ways in neo-Kantianism. So in Marburg, you have this universal concept of, at the end of Cohen's psychology and his ethics, you have this talk about Psychologie des Gesamtbewusstseins, and that means in the Herder perspective, a universal concept. And Cassirer goes this way, no? In Idee und Gestalt. He has no nationalistic pathos, but the Southwest school goes straight this way into particularity, what culture is, and if you can look at the Zeitschrift, the journal Logos, which there is this tendency between particularity and university, is the problem of their program. And at the beginning of the First World War, the Great War, that was only a moment to throw out all the international colleagues from other countries and to, without problems, to say, well, let's go on. The Logos is a national concept. Yeah, a sad story, but this is, yeah, that's it. I think so.
So we have 3 questions. So
I have time.
Okay. Please, Professor Keenan.
Or beginning of the placeholder for Windows 6 was.
Pardon?
In the first part of your talk, you presented the Peruvian.
Yeah.
Said placeholder.
Yeah.
Yeah. System was.
Yeah.
In a way, it's case, but people also gave constantly in a way and highlighted on philosophy.
Yeah.
This highlight on philosophy is how it's supposed to be the operation of the system. If that's really the case, but at least there's something that transcends the workplace also. Now, there you see, I think, the relationship between basic issue of also.
Yeah.
It's only not remarkable to display it all. So, but my main point is indeed this discussion. And for myself, I praised it with one of your time slides, where you said that Windelband is a conservative regarding values. And I wonder what you meant with that. Apparently, what you mean with this is what say that fits very well into this discussion about, let's say, nationality.
Mhm.
Well, yeah, I would probably disagree with that. The reason being that I would propose to differentiate one a bit further. Namely that in first instance, this normal society is not a kind of cultural society. Namely, first implementation, modern society is can in the ones appropriation of Kant's structure of faculty of reason, and therefore was a basic denominations of modern society, take moral theories, and then this religions and divine issue. So this is basically now on this level, I think does not make sense to talk about plurality culture. This is just to say the kind of neo-Kantian facing what needs to be human. And it's a by its structure. Now, with the second question, there I fully agree with you. How this works out in concrete evaluation of culture, of course, the position is. But I would say it's more or less when we could even say it's kind of misinterpretation of the charity of this formal structure. So I would not see that there is a direct link or necessity to come from this formal structure in the modern side to this orchestrated nationalism as proposed one being about in my heart. So therefore, I would be published something about my heart if we say that's not justice to his own standards of reason.
Yeah.
You see that's not possible. So therefore, these are for this distinction between normal, which is the formal structure of personality, and secondly, these kind of things that Europeans are saying, always.
Yeah.
So on the first level, I don't see anything of this.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Very short answers to the first remark. Yes, there is the Einleitung in die Philosophie, and this is another placeholder. And we edited the letters of Windelband, and he's constantly writing to his colleagues, okay, you're expecting my psychology. I'm writing on it, but I have no time anymore. I'm now rector of the university, and now I'm in the academy. I'm preparing the International Congress for Philosophy at Heidelberg. So he's always in this mode of saying, yes, I'm doing it, but not yet. Yeah. And this is, okay, yeah, we know this. We are all in this situation, I think. And next point. Yeah, I started reading Windelband from his first essay as an author for the Zeitschrift für Völkerpsychologie und Sprachwissenschaft, and and Windelband as a student of Chaim Steinthal and others, and he published his famous article über Denkpsychologie in völkerpsychologischer Hinsicht, and he never brought it to this preludium because what he said as a young man was the contrary of what he said after this. Yeah, so Normalbewusstsein is his strategy to have an instrument against the problem of epistemic relativism. So this, and I think is for him this is the guiding question: how to avoid relativism. That is the cancer, yeah, of his time. This is, as you perhaps know, relativism is. There are only a few persons in the philosophical scene that say, well, my position is a relativistic position. Simmel, he did this, but the others said, well, what I'm doing is against relativism. That goes from until Adorno in the negative dialectic said relativism, that's not good. So yeah, and so about your third position we should discuss because perhaps in in
Thank you.
yeah, it's not all about consequences, you know. We discussing the Universitätsphilosophie around 1900, and we are looking at the consequences. Not everything is delegitimized by the consequences. Yeah, so you know, normales Volksbewusstsein is not the same as völkisches Bewusstsein in the 1930s. It's not this. So, and yeah, but it is connected with. So Gadamer's famous talk in Paris in 41 at the Deutsche Institut für Kultur there about Herder and history and folk. He said, well, this is a völkisches concept, no, in this last page. So yeah, you can bring this together, and I asked you, his PhD supervisor was Isaiah Berlin, and asked him yesterday about Berlin, and Berlin's perspective on Herder is not so positive. So he says, well, that begins this particularity, this national awakening with Herder. And I'm not sure that this is correct. This is very polemic perspective on Herder. I also would say from Herder on, we have an alternative to this Volksgeist I mentioned in our discussion here. Yeah,
I think so. Too.
yeah, okay, yeah.
Okay, so we have another question from Giovanni Moruna.
Das ist sehr problematisch. In jedem Fall ist klar, man kann tatsächlich merken, in späten zum besten die Identifizierung in die Metaphysiksierung und Evolution dieser Grundbegriffe der Geschichte. Aber wenn wir anschauen, die Geschichte, da ist ganz klar, dass wird ein Modell erarbeitet, der Universalgeschichte als Normalisierung. Wo die Pluralität des Volkes, die Pluralität der Kulturen in eine Mischkultur hinein ist. Aber diese Mischkultur ist eine Normalkultur, in der wo die Universalgüter der Vernunft sich allmählich verbinden. Aber wo ist der Hauptunterschied? Das verhindert die Identifizierung zwischen Normalität und Normal. Weil ist die kantianische Inspiration im Punkt der Pandemie weiter. Das heißt, diese Kultur, die Maus, es bleibt immer eine Aufgabe, bleibt immer ein Horizont der Bildungsarbeit in der Geschichte. Es ist nicht wirklich. Bleibt immer eine kritische Begründung, nämlich die Wirklichkeit in ihrer Inkohärenz, die Richtigkeit bewerten und verwerten. Das ist diese kleine kritische Grenze, die das Windelmann wird in der Tradition von Lasten eine volle Identifizierung, eine nationalistische Identifizierung normal.
Ja.
Das ist zumindest meine Einstellung.
Ja. May I answer on German? Or
Yes.
would you prefer? Ja, vielen Dank. Wahrscheinlich ist Windelband auch kein kohärenter Denker. Als Historiker beschreibt er genau diesen Prozess einer zunehmenden Universalisierung der Kulturen, ja, einer dialektischen Spannung zwischen Eigenem und Fremdem und einer Annäherung an das Ideal Humanität. Aber hier in den Präludien gibt es einen Aufsatz, den er gehalten hat über, also, und das wäre dann auch eine Idealisierung des Normalbewusstseins. Ja, also das Normalbewusstsein der Gesamtkultur, der Menschheit, würde die Überwindung der Nationalkultur bedeuten. Jetzt gibt es aber hier einen Aufsatz, den er gehalten hat vor der Juristenvereinigung, Strafrechtsvereinigung in Heidelberg. Und da spricht er davon und sagt, ja, ich kann Ihre Überlegungen sehr gut verstehen. Also was machen wir eigentlich? Wir versuchen Recht zu sprechen und das Recht orientiert sich immer an dem Normalverhalten und Normalbewusstsein von Menschen. Und das bedeutet, dass alle anderen, die nicht Teil des Normalbewusstseins sind, pathologisiert werden. Und das ist ein wichtiger Schritt. Also das ist und das ist in der Zeit en vogue, ne? Medizin und Jurist und Anthropologie, alles ist durcheinander gemischt. Man war der Meinung, dass man tatsächlich, Italiener hatten Lombroso und so weiter, man war der Meinung, dass man objektive Kriterien hat für Kriminalität und anderes. Und man war der Meinung, dass man das bestimmen kann. Also Normalität kann man bestimmen und Normalität und Normativität sind dann identisch an der Stelle und alles andere ist pathologisch. Und was wir damit machen mit den anderen, das ist dann eine offene Frage. Ja, deswegen habe ich eben gesagt, das ist der Einstieg in eine auch Politik der Ausgrenzung, der Diskriminierung, der Kriminalisierung, der Pathologisierung von anderen, nicht normalen. Nicht das Windelband der Meinung war, dass man das alle konsequent, aber es ist eine Idee, es ist eine Theorie, ja. Deswegen ist das aus meiner Sicht halt eine schwierige Geschichte, ja, okay, ich stoppe hier.
Okay, so we have a question from Scott Edgar, and then please a short question from, sorry, Pepe, Professor Keenan asked for a short question. We can make it be short, and then, okay, thank you. So, Scott.
Very, follow on what you say, but also the response to Fred. And I wonder if there is such a difference between the Southwest School and the Marvel School with respect to the uneasy tension between universalism and cosmopolitanism on the one hand, and the nationalism and particularism on the other. And I'm thinking in particular of, I think you mentioned it yourself, like Cohen's motion to Woodton. I don't understand how to fit that with his official ethics and political philosophy. Very well, but not, I mean, the essay and the pamphlet version have exactly the kind of particularism that you're talking about in Lindelof. So, should we even be as charitable towards the Marvel School as it sounded like we were going to be?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So my answer couldn't be decisive. There are people that have done research on this question. For example, Ulrich Sieg on the Marburg School, and I would say, yeah, there is a difference between, and if you look at Cohen's essay Deutschtum und Judentum, you see that he has a third point. No, this is humanity or universe, and yeah, with that is not contrary with Windelband, absolute contrary, but there's a very subtle differences. And we have to work it out. So I wouldn't say that this is absolute gap between this. That would say, then we would discuss the consequences of this systematically. points. Yeah, but yeah, the neo-Kantianism is a very, that is my message, is a very complex thing, and there is no identical, there is no nucleus, there's no kern, and there's a lot of dimensions in it, yeah. So, and we are only discussing this Marburg and Southwestern thing. So we have neo-Kantianism at Berlin and at Halle, and yeah, we have Feinger, we have Paulsen, and we have this around with different perspectives on what is Kant. Yeah, Feinger, the famous commentator and founder of the Kant-Gesellschaft. And, okay, yeah.
Okay, one last remark from Professor Keenan.
Yeah, I just want to come back to this discussion we have. I mean, this whole idea of this goal for this side of the environment. I would say if we try to reformulate the problem, you have the social way. But my suggestion would be that I think completely underappreciated to have a closer look at the influence of the people on the practical philosophy of neo-Kantianism, in particular Southwest neo-Kantianism, and confront that with Kant's practical philosophy, in particular the philosophy of right.
Yeah.
Then, for example, that's why I say that maybe it's not because to their own standards, then you can see immediately in this whole idea that right means the origin of the law itself towards maybe, let's say, the sort of process is completely uncanny. Because then you have to orient yourself towards the concept of right, which is to bring the people like the government according to the law of freedom of all.
Yeah.
So you know, so therefore I think that with regard to the problems it would be very interesting to bring people into the debate and confront it with perspective, because for me it was really, so to say, shocking for a very long time from the secret valve is not most intelligent, the sharpest. Does it the second point was ethics? I mean, he just writes down his worldview.
Yeah.
It's nothing to do with statements and then the possible. You know, how is this possible? And then all these things almost nowhere.
Yeah.
I think this is the issue. So therefore, this should be a quite philosophical formulation of this problem.
Yeah.
Rather than more societal.
Yeah. I agree. I would say I agree. And you can see, you can read, we have Klaus Christian Köhnke's book on Entstehung des Neukantianismus, and there a chapter on the Fichte lectures from the Reichsgründung, founding of the German Empire on. There were, every year they were at the birthday of the Kaiser, the famous Fichte reden, and this is yeah, and all our philosophers were involved in this, giving national pathos to the discussion. So yeah, okay, yeah.
Thank you, Professor Aston. Yeah.